Can you hear us? Hello?
Yes, we hear you.
Oh my gosh, you guys are all the way over in South Carolina.
Yes, we are. We're very sad to be so far from you and looking at your beautiful faces.
Yes, it's so sad.
I miss you.
I miss you guys too. But for now, I'm so excited because we're going to record with my mom today, Miss Ashlie
so
Lancaster.
Hi, Ashlie.
Hi, Kelly and Kellyanne. Sure is nice to see you guys again.
Oh, thank you. We are so excited to be here with you today. Also, congratulations because you got married.
Congratulations.
Very
Thank you.
recently.
Yes.
So
Gotta
happy.
show the bling. That's
The bling.
Ooh, yes.
that hand.
But yeah, we are so excited to be talking to you today about female empowerment, women in government, you name it, we're going to talk about it. So without further ado, I guess we'll just dive right in.
This is Woman Being,
where we explore thoughts and opinions
And have the freedom to change our minds.
without expectation or judgment.
We will hold a safe space and support each other
As we navigate together in the form of feminine.
So, Ashlie, tell us, how did you raise such an amazing daughter?
I have no idea. I'm so lucky, I will say. I certainly can't take all the credit for it, but the one thing I wanted was to raise a daughter who was a critical thinker, and I think I definitely got that, as evidenced by not only her wonderful critical thinking friends, but this podcast itself.
Wow.
Yeah, Emma she's the thinker for sure.
Yes, absolutely. Honestly, she's actually been one that has really pushed me in my own critical thinking. So well done to you. Huge round of applause.
Yes,
Aw,
you've
thank
done us all a service.
Aw. Oh, your hands are sweaty.
Thanks.
Now the world can know. So, Mom, before we really dive right in, or should I call you Ashlie?
I think
Ashlie?
you can call me Ashlie.
Okay, thank you. Ashlie, before we really dive in, could you just briefly explain what it is that you do? I know you've worked in state government here in South Carolina my whole life, basically like for the past 22 years. But what is it that you do in state government in layman's terms?
Okay.
For us peasants who are not part of government.
You are correct. I have worked in state government for 22 years now. It's hard to believe. And currently what I do is we do property management, which basically means that we have buildings with tenants in them that we operate and maintain. We broker the sale and purchase of state property, and we do state leases for commercial entities.
Yeah. And which is like something that I feel like I don't really think about the state government having to do, but you have to keep everything running.
That's right. And that's the one thing I like about this job is that we sort of provide the support structure for all the other agencies. And so even though in previous jobs I was fortunate to be able to do lots of advocacy type work, you know.
Yeah, like you worked in the energy office,
Yeah.
and you worked with people who needed like support from the government.
For low-income community action agencies and homeless shelters, and those were very fulfilling. And it took me a while to sort of get comfortable with this new role, but we get to support all the other agencies that do those types of things. So it's kind of like we get to do everything.
You're empowering them to do what they do.
Exactly.
That's very cool.
That's amazing. I didn't even know that was like a thing. It's a thing. But it makes sense. Like somebody's got to do all those things.
Yep.
Yeah.
But yeah, that's incredible. How did you get into government? Like, where did you start your journey working for the U.S. government?
Well, you know, I really never thought that I would work for government. And I think, like most of us, we generally don't know what we're going to do when we're in high school or in college. And most of my college days were spent protesting against the government and things that government was doing, and burning our bras in the streets, and trying to make sure that Roe versus Wade wasn't overturned in the late 80s, early 90s, and trying to convince people that global warming was real. So I spent a lot of time doing those types of things. things, and decided that I would major in political philosophy and go to grad school. And I really thought that I would be a college professor. That's actually was what I had always planned to do. And once I got there and started actually teaching classes, I realized that I hated it. It was absolutely horrible. I felt very disconnected from the real world. I felt like most of the kids that were in there trying to learn from us about politics really didn't care. They just wanted to get through the classes until they could go out into the real world and make money. So I just landed an internship actually in state government, and as I started working there, I realized what a great way to actually make a difference. You know, you can be out there in the streets and you can be protesting and thinking about how to make a difference, and those things do move the meter. They often do, particularly with very controversial issues. But the great thing about state government is every single day you get to somehow shape what's happening, whether it's through service delivery or policy making. You're right in the root of it, and I really like that part of it and have been so happy that that's what I decided to do.
Wow, that's incredible. And there, I feel like there are so few women in government too, but going from bra burning to, infrastructure, that's like quite the jump. But I mean, it sounds like more of an empowering, like, direction that you took. You started to, like, I don't know, change things from the inside.
Yeah, an insider agent. So then, as you went from, protesting the government and sort of working against the government, essentially, what was that transition like for you as you came into working for government? Was that like hard for you to wrap your mind around doing, or what was that like?
I think sometimes it certainly was difficult to adapt to that new role. One of the main reasons is because once you become a government employee, you have to, in some ways, keep your own personal beliefs to yourself. And certainly the more you grow and the higher up you get in government, that becomes more of the case, because you are oftentimes your job is subject to whatever political party is actually in power at that particular time. So that part was a little bit hard for me, trying to remember, for example, that I can't post things on social media about what I believe because it might get me fired, that type of thing. But also, and as I mentioned before, being able to get in there and really engage with the folks that were making decisions about how programs were going to be run allowed for me to have a voice that I really had not had before when I was out there on the margins. And so I think that overall was a really good thing. And then over time, figuring out how to navigate the two and go between them and be able to say what you think and have some of those things actually be implemented, but without making people so turned off by some sort of radicalism is an art. And it was something that took some time, and I think that's part of what growing in that type of job means.
Mm. Yeah, that would be an art. It's like everything is so quickly, like, heightened these days. Well, especially now. But it feels like, we've, it built off of something to arrive where we've arrived. And so making positive action can be so difficult when things get really controversial.
Yeah, definitely. And I will say a lot of folks really didn't know how to take me. At that point in time in my life, I had until just a couple years before that, I didn't shave my legs or under my arms. I never wore a bra. My hair was down to my butt pretty much, and I wore hippie skirts and T-shirts every day. So when I went in to start working in state government, it was a big shocker, and I think shocker to other people as well. Like, who is this freaky girl, and what is she doing here? But and this was something that was really hard for me to learn. And actually, one of my girlfriends, I had been working for state government probably, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years at the time, and we were hanging out together, and she said, you would be able to accomplish a lot more if you would put on a suit and do your hair and put on some makeup. And I was just so appalled by that. And I was like, why would I want to do that? Why would I sell out who I am and try to dress like them or be like them? That just seemed to me like the worst thing you could possibly do. But she said, no, you'll find that you can actually do more. And she was so right. And I did just a little. I didn't change at the crux who I am, but I did. I started dressing a little bit more, more professionally, and I started, doing my hair a little more professionally, and started thinking about what those things meant. And surprisingly, and I guess in some ways, unfortunately, because it shouldn't be like that, in the sense that you have to be like other people to be accepted. But they did listen to me more, and I found that I was able to do more as a result of that. And so that was also something that was kind of interesting to me that happened as I was going through state government.
Yeah, that's so good. It actually makes me think of what I refer to often in the business world as playing the game, right? And it's the jokes and the buddy and being strategic about the way people might perceive you to quote unquote infiltrate the boys club, and then really be able to have the authority and the respect to be listened to. I feel like that's something as a young professional that I'm pretty constantly navigating, because you do feel like, well, I don't want to compromise my integrity, but there's also the level of like, well, I actually want to be effective and I want to be able to support change in a positive way. And sometimes that means you have to make some compromises.
Well, we all need like the various roles, right, that society has to play. Like we need the bra burners who are going to point out problems, and we need the people who are going to put on the suits and like go in and influence it from the inside. So like it's so fun to like imagine you back, what was it, the 70s? I'm guessing
80s. 80s. How dare you?
80s, early 90s. Not quite that
80s
old,
or the
y'all.
90s. Oh my God, I'm so sorry. It was probably the early 2000s. You look so young.
It was yesterday.
I just think
It was, yeah.
I don't know.
This
I
year.
automatically associate hippie with 70s.
Well, she was
sure.
part of what's
80s.
called the yippie movement, right?
Yeah, it was more like that. It was
Yeah.
sort of a
So they
comeback.
were the young hippies, right? It was like a new wave of hippie in the 80s.
So second wave hippie.
Yeah. Really.
It's totally what it was.
Okay, that's amazing. Okay, so it's so fun to imagine you there. And then, so you've kind of seen different forms of the way that society works and the way that, change is enforced. And that's really cool.
Yeah.
Okay, Ashley, so I feel like this begs the question to answer the elephant in the room. It feels like you're pretty clearly fairly left-leaning, if that's fair to say, in a government that is about as red as they come, right? And so how do you really navigate the tension of working for an administration that you probably pretty much disagree with?
Well, certainly that is always a challenge, and there have been times when I've worked with the administration and felt like, oh gosh, how can I stomach that? How can I stand that? What they're doing is so against what I would want to do in that particular situation. But I think the main thing is that you have to remember that we're all people, and ultimately people all want the same thing. They want to, have a good shelter over their head. They want to have food to eat. They want to have family. They want to be loved. And if we remember those things, and we remember that ultimately we're all people and we're all here to try to make the world better for all people, then you can kind of target the things that you want to do within an administration that may or may not agree with you, and still make a difference within those boundaries. And also, I think it's what's nice about that is if you gain the respect of others that maybe don't agree with you, they're more likely to listen to what you have to say and to be open to not just listening, but to hearing it, and maybe even understanding and implementing some of those changes. And so even though it doesn't always work that way, I do think that's been a good thing, because we all need to understand and hear other perspectives. I mean, that's sort of at the root of what I think the left believes, and that's tolerance. We don't have to be tolerant of the intolerant, but we certainly have to be tolerant and be aware of the fact that other people are going to have different ideas, that we're not all going to agree, and that thank goodness we don't, because wouldn't the world be a horribly boring place if we did?
I agree. I think that's so true. And for myself, I was raised really conservative, and now socially I'm quite liberal. And I feel like that has been one of the safest places in the process of discovering what I agree with or disagree with, to have people that are safe to have conversations with, and to say things that I'm I actually don't know if I believe this, but can I just say it and see what it sounds like? Mm-hmm. And with that respect comes trust and rapport. And maybe at the end of the day, we don't agree, or maybe we do, but I still have that respect. I think that is what we all could use more of in
Yeah.
this day and age.
Just need a little
Absolutely.
respect.
R-E-S-P-C-T. Yeah, and I mean, Ashley, I'm not sure if this is applicable as well, but I mean, a role of yours that we didn't mention is that you also are like a point person when there's disasters here in South Carolina. So that sort of activates whenever we have hurricanes or flooding, or even in the pandemic, you've been getting resources for people and different things, and giving aid. And so whenever there's something like that, you wind up, you've even traveled around the state and given aid to people after flooding and different things like that, and had to work directly with even a governor that you might not agree with.
Well, I was actually very fortunate to get to work with Governor Haley during the 2015 thousand-year flood, which was just a horrible, devastating event here in South Carolina. So many people were displaced from their homes, I mean, for months, some for even a couple of years, trying to rebuild. Many of them didn't have the basic necessities like food and shelter. And so this was a really hard time. And Governor Haley, of course, being a very conservative governor.
And our first female governor.
Female governor, yes, yay, Governor Haley. It was an interesting time where you really saw that bipartisan beliefs did not matter anymore. We were able to travel around with her and distribute goods like food and medicine and things like that to folks that really needed it in the community. And it was just a fantastic experience to see her in action, and to see all of us with lots of different views coming together, because all we wanted to do was to help those people who were in need.
Yeah, I love that. It actually makes me think of a coaching call I was on just the other day with another woman, and we were talking about the responsibility as women rise up in power to support each other. And I love what you're describing, because it really speaks to the power of what can we agree on. We can agree that people need help. Like, people need shelter, people need food, people need medicine, and like combining your strength and your influence to achieve that goal. I love that you guys got to do that together. And it just speaks to the power of when women actually support each other, not much can stop us. Let's get real. So I love that.
Well, and speaking of women, do you want to just speak into like what it's like being a woman in government, like which has been for so long historically a male-led institution, and more women are kind of stepping into it, but it's still kind of like not sort of the norm yet. So what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, certainly it is something that is changing, and I'm very glad to see that. We're seeing more and more women, not only in government, but also in politics. And certainly we need that, because we need that type of diversity and the varying perspectives that women can bring, both to government and to politics and the policy-making aspects of those things. When I first started off in state government, I can remember going over to the State House, where the General Assembly would be in session, and there's a lobby there that you would sort of wait out in the lobby or send in a note in the event that you wanted to talk to one of the policymakers to try to get them to pass legislation. And at that point in time, I was working for the State Office of Victim Assistance, and we were which provides compensation to crime victims, advocacy services, victim advocate types of things. And so we were actually trying to get passed a bill that would have created an interagency coordinating council to help ensure that victim services were being provided appropriately. So what I did not know when I first went over there is that apparently you were not allowed to wear pants in the lobby of the State House at that point in time. This was in the early 90s. And even though there was, of course, no hard and fast rule, that was the practice. And I looked very odd there with my pantsuit on and found out very quickly that was not okay. Of course, now I hardly ever see women wearing skirts. And they almost always are wearing pantsuits, because I think that's what they feel more comfortable with, and don't feel anymore like you have to be on display or look sexy in order to have an audience with a policymaker. So that's something that's changed dramatically during that time. And I've also been very fortunate. Like I said, I was able to work with Governor Haley, and so one of the first Southern woman governor, which was huge, and I think that was fantastic insofar as she was able to help us understand that no matter whether you agreed with her or not, she was supportive of exactly what you were talking about giving other women a hand up. How do we help support other women in their growth? And at that point in time, some friends of mine and we were involved very heavily with an organization called the Crescent Society, which and the whole point of our organization was a women's club, and we got together once a month. And the whole point of our organization was exactly that, to try to give a hand up to other women who were working to become leaders within state government, whether it be within the school district or in government itself, and even lots of folks out from the private sector. And Governor Haley came and spoke with us, and that was probably one of the best sessions I think that we had. And she talked a lot about how when she was in the House of Representatives here for South Carolina, that she had worked really hard to get voting on the record, and that it was a very male-dominated legislature, that she had worked hard to gain positions on committees, which is where the real work happens, and that when she decided she wanted to bring forward this legislation to have voting on the record, that the good old boy system in South Carolina did not like that. And in fact, they stripped her. They told her to leave it alone, and that if she didn't leave it alone, that she was never going to continue to be successful in state government. And she didn't leave it alone. They stripped her of all of her committees and basically left her powerless. And she said she was at home talking with her husband, and she said, "What do I do? What do I do now? This good old boy system has just has sort of knocked me down." And he said, "Well, run for governor," and that's exactly what she did. So I guess she showed them. But that, and also having other women as role models that have come up through state government, is something that I think is really important, and I think it's important for us as leaders to continue to provide that same type of guidance and support to other young women who are coming forward. Many times women have been, I think, historically catty, competitive against one another. And what's really important is that we don't let that take control. We don't let our own need to succeed sort of walk all over the need for women in general to succeed, and that we recognize that we do have commonalities, and that together and by supporting one another, we can help the whole movement.
Wow. That's good
Yeah,
stuff.
I actually, and you mentioning the first part about, your appearance in government, like talking about whether or not to wear a pantsuit or different things like that. I actually think a lot about Hillary Clinton with that, who actually, we have her book here on our stack that we're using to hold up my microphone. But I listened to a book review the other day of I think it's Huma Abedin. Do you know who she is? Huma?
I don't.
She was sort of Hillary Clinton's right-hand woman. And she was married to a senator, I think at the time, that Hillary was the first lady, and sort of helped her with her campaign, helped her with all sorts of things. And in that memoir, she talks a lot about how there was so much back and forth of how to present Hillary in a way that is like digestible, essentially, by the public. And there was so much that contradicted as well, where it was like, well, you're too bullish, you're too manly, you're too whatever, you're wearing these pantsuits, and like it's too much, and with your short hair and everything. And then she would try to wear makeup, they put her in a lot of pink to make her seem more feminine. They would try to have her like change the inflection of her voice, and they would say, oh well, we don't want to listen to you. You're too feminine now. It's this tension of going back and forth. Like, okay, well, how do you even please the public when the public is sort of instantly going to label you in some way,
That's so true. And, this is another thing that we find a lot of times. I think women deal with this, not only in government, but just in the world in general, is that you can be a strong woman and say, like, I've had the same experience on my own with my own employees, is that, you try to get them to do something, and then maybe you get upset, or you come across as being tough and hard, and all of a sudden you're a bitch. Whereas if a man said those types of things, they wouldn't think that at all. Mm-hmm. Or the opposite, you try to be compassionate, or you let someone see you cry. Or I actually, for many years, would not make anything food-wise to bring to office parties because I didn't want anybody to think I could cook, because that would be like labeling me as a woman.
Yeah.
So it's almost like you can't win.
Yeah.
You're either too hard or too soft, and it's something you're constantly having to struggle with.
Mm.
Dang. That's a lot of mind fuckery, Like, how do you...
It is.
And I think I see this in my life, in the professional, sector, is like, how do I present myself? Do I come across as feminine? Do I express myself as more masculine? Do I wear lots of makeup? Do I wear no makeup? Like, what's going to help people, or what's going to expand my influence is what it comes down to. Is like, I think similar to what you said earlier is, we still are who we are. Like, nothing changes our internal self, but the expression of that, is important, but it also can make a really big difference into how people perceive you, whether people want to vote for you, whether people are even listening to what you're saying. Mm-hmm. And that's wild.
Yeah.
For sure.
So then, Ashlie, do you see a difference in how women lead in government versus men? On this topic of, we're constantly concerned about how we're perceived and our appearances, and maybe you should wear pink, maybe you should wear less makeup, change the way you talk. Like, how do you feel like that can impact their leadership style?
Well, I certainly don't want to generalize, and I think that's a problem that we have in all aspects of life. And so to say that all women are one way or all men are one way in terms of their leadership, I think would be incorrect and be doing a disservice to the huge variety of women and men that are out there. But I do think that in general, women, to me, in my experience, seem to be almost more of micromanagers. They're not as good as delegating as men are. I think a lot of that is because there's this underlying concern that everything they do has to be perfect in order for them to be successful. And so there's a fear a lot of times of letting someone else do it, because then it won't be the way you wanted it to be. And so one of the things I think a lot of women have to deal with is trying to figure out how can you let go of that and let others be part of that team, because that's a good thing to have a team to support you, and also, like we talked about earlier, to give other people a chance to shine. But I do think women are that way a lot of times out of fear. I also think, though, that women are more likely to get things done, which is, again, probably a function of being willing to do it themselves. But Margaret Thatcher had a great saying, which was, if you want something said, ask a man. If you want something done, ask a woman. And I think she was right on that.
Yeah, and that makes so much sense to me, in the sense that there is a higher standard for women a lot of times to succeed, because the moment that you slip up, it's like, oh, well, see, you weren't qualified for this. We'll see, we were right that a woman doesn't really have a place in the White House or something like that. So the moment that a woman screws up, it feels like that's all going to be taken away. And I think there's been progress in that, and that's become less true over the years. But there's still also, I think, just that historical trauma of knowing that women have so long been excluded from different roles, from positions of leadership, that they say, well, I'm gonna take control of everything, because that means that I'll know that it's being done well. I'll know that I will have my eye on every single thing that's happening. But if you hand it off to other people, then you have to trust them to do it well. And that can be really scary just in general as a leader. And so I definitely can see how women would feel the need to sort of micromanage, if you will. That term has a lot of stigma attached to it.
Negative connotation, but I think true to a lot of extent.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Well, yeah, and I think that ties into something we talked about with Bernie recently, which is that if you have a woman step up to the plate and she makes a big mess, that is not just a reflection on her. It's not like she gets canceled and we move on. It's actually people's confirmation bias steps in. And it's not just a reflection on that person who made a mistake. It actually tarnished the reputation of women as leaders in general. And so rather than women stepping forward and leading boldly and making mistakes and, still kicking ass, you have a mistake happens and it actually exacerbates the problem rather than helping bring more women into positions of leadership because you sort of strengthen people's bias against them in the first place. So, yeah, that gets really tricky.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I think that's an issue that we see sort of across the board in struggles for equality. I even think about with the Black Lives Matter protests last year, or I guess at this point, when this is coming out, it'll have been 2 years ago. But the summer of 2020, there were riots or looting that happened, and that to some people meant, oh, well, then this entire cause needs to be throwing out the baby with the bathwater, because there were some things that were not a quote unquote peaceful protest or whatever. And I think that's really unfortunate because then there's a lot of generalization that happens and people sort of just will group an entire group of people in as one homogenous group when actually there's so much diversity within, womanhood or within the cause for equality with the races or, anything that you can think of really.
Well, and one thing we all know is that people they're not at their best when they're scared. And so you have potentially people of all sorts of minorities who are trying to step into positions of leadership or greater positions of influence or just different work, different spheres of work or life. And we're not at our best when we're afraid and micromanaging and trying to control everything. Humanity was made to step forward boldly and screw up sometimes. But yeah, I think perfection as the measurement can just add an extreme amount of stress. I can only imagine how stressed women in politics are compared to their male counterparts.
Oh my gosh, literally, yes. Which actually I feel kind of leads into another question, and that is how can women lift one another up to bring more women into positions of influence in government, especially when we're confronting things like confirmation bias or maybe even self-doubt, or maybe we're scared or stressed. How do we kill that, basically?
Yeah, that's a hard one, and I think one that women have struggled with for many years. And I think, obviously you can do certain things, like you can help promote women from within. If you're a woman and you're in a position of power and you recognize that someone that's working with you has talent and has the potential, then you can help grow that potential. You can train them. You can give them a higher position. You can give them a raise. All of those things are easy and great ways that you can do things like that. But it certainly takes a whole lot more than that. I think it's also talking with other women about being who they are and not necessarily having to be something different in order to be successful. And it's about talking with men, and it's about how you treat men in the workplace. So, for example, if you have someone who's working with you and his wife just had a baby, and he comes to you and he says, I need to take 6 weeks of FMLA because I need to be at home to take care of my child, then you say, absolutely, because that's what men ought to be doing, and their role as a father is just as important as the role of the woman as a mother. Absolutely. And we're going to support both of you by letting you both have the time off you need in order to raise that child. Or if you have a man who needs to pick up their child from school every afternoon because the mother can't do it because her workplace won't allow for that type of flexibility. You can help further women's rights and women's success in the workplace by letting her husband do precisely that. So I think those things are really just as important as the conversations that we have as women, or as helping women by promoting them. It's also helping make sure that we try to get rid of some of these traditional notions of family that have kept women in the home, and embrace this idea that both men and women can be involved in the workplace, can have careers, can do things that they feel passionate about, even have their own social life, and that those things are normal, and that makes for a more successful and a more happy home and a better family life for them and for their children than the way that the traditional models have been that kept women in the home.
Yeah, that's good stuff.
Yeah.
That's good stuff.
Yeah, and I mean, and I think too, like when you talk about like promoting like women who you see that have talent, I think another thing that could be valuable in that same hand is promoting men who advocate for women as well. You know, like recognizing men who may also have talent, but also are willing and have shown a track record of like treating women in an equitable way and in working well with women in the workplace and like being someone who's not just like a safe person for women to be around in the workplace, but also someone who will advocate for and recognize women in the workplace. I think that's another thing that springs to mind when you list that off.
Someone who's empowering. Yeah, I agree with that.
So, Ashlie, this is kind of a question that's come up as we've been talking, but one thing I've noticed as you've been talking about, you know, working across different opinions and political leanings and, you know, teaming up to make stuff happen, there's a lot of hope in that, right? Like that we can come together, that when the rubber hits the road, we'll see what really matters. And even though we have disagreements on maybe how it should be done or like the specific, you know, who's it's and what's it's, like we can still make a difference. But I think in our current political climate, that sentiment is feeling increasingly less probable. Like it feels harder and harder to have a conversation across the table with somebody who you don't necessarily agree with. It's harder to see a solution when the, you know, two like opinions are so diverse. So I guess my question is like, do you have hope for our future, you know, for the cross-partisanship to continue to happen? And if so, what is that hope and what kind of keeps you going as you know, navigate the last crazy 3 years that we've been experiencing?
Well, I certainly have hope, and I think if we lose hope, then we've really lost everything. And you know, over the last 30 years of my life as an adult who I think at some level has been engaged in politics throughout that whole entire time, it occurs to me that the pendulum consistently swings from one side to the other. And while right now we're in a very polarizing time in our life and in our political life, I think ultimately we will find that eventually will change and the pendulum will swing back towards the middle. And I think it all goes back again to this whole idea that we're all people, whether we're liberals or conservatives, women or men or, you know, trans, bi, you know, LBGT, doesn't matter. Ultimately, we're all people and we all really, again, want the same things. We want shelter, we want food, we want friendship, we want love. And I think if we continue to show people that they will show it back to us. And, you know, when I was in college, when I first went off to college, I was such a shy person. I was so scared and I really hardly ever spoke to anyone. I mean, I was a bookworm throughout most of high school, and I got to this huge college. Well, it was huge for me. It's actually a pretty small college. But I got to college in Atlanta, and I remember there was this long trail that you had to walk from the dorms to where you got to the classroom. And every person I would walk by, they would put their eyes to the ground, and no one ever spoke to each other, and they just walked along. They didn't smile, nothing. And I made a decision one day. Don't know what made me do this, but I just made a decision one day that every single person that passed me on that trail, that I was going to smile at them and say hello. And I started doing it. And amazingly, they all smiled back and said hello too, because they were just as afraid as I was. And I think if we can remember that and remember that we need to always be kind and be welcoming to other people, that we'll find that ultimately they will be that way back to us. And then that's where we find our common ground. We focus on those things, on that moment of humanity, as opposed to on those things that divide us. And ultimately we will all survive. And that's what gives me hope.
Yeah, well, thank you for that. And
making me emotional.
thank you for, yeah. Yeah, I think that's what we really need right now, like as a country, and even as a world. Like there's so much despair, I think, happening across the globe. It's like, how are we really going to work together again? Where's that common ground? And I think, keeping that in mind is like bringing it back to the basics of, kindness and smiling at people and extending a hand, that can actually go a long way.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and I even think too, like, one thing that I feel like is grounding to me a little bit is to remember that the world at large has been through some really, really dark times, like we've had 2 like world wars, and we've had all these horrible atrocities that have happened, and it feels a little bit frustrating, and it's like, well, things keep happening. But it's also, I think, a testament of just like the power of the human spirit that we carry on, through all of that, and that people still have the capacity for hope. People still have the capacity for love, So, Mom, Ashlie, whoever you are, thank you so much for talking to us about all these things and about your experiences in working in government and like your perspective. Obviously, I find your perspective very valuable. It's part of how I was raised and why I believe the things that I believe now. But the one question we still have to ask you, that we ask all of our guests, it's coming. It's, what does woman being mean to you, Ashlie?
Well, Emma, I really enjoyed y'all's podcast over the last couple of years, actually. And has it actually been a couple of years?
I mean, it's been like a year and a half.
A year and a half. And, and getting to know the 3 of you, including you, my own daughter, through this podcast has been amazing. And but when I think about woman being, of course, it's not just the name of your podcast. It's much more. And I've thought about it a lot. And to me, woman being means just that, being a woman, and knowing that it doesn't matter if you are the woman that your dad thought a woman meant, what a woman ought to be, or what Donald Trump thinks a woman ought to be, or what Hillary Clinton thinks a woman ought to be, or what your own father and mother think a woman ought to be. It's about the fact that being a woman is every single thing that makes up every woman out there, and that all of those things are valuable and should be valued as a result. And so to me, that's what's been really great about this experience today, talking with y'all, but also and listening to your podcast, and really trying to understand that I think the message is being a woman means being whoever you are. Just because you're a woman doesn't change that.
Yeah, thank you for that. And then another question we always ask guests, and I'm curious to see what you're going to say for this, is we love to offer resources for, young people who are listening to this podcast, or old people, or whoever is listening, in ways that they can further themselves, further their, knowledge of the world. So what resources would you recommend to someone listening to this podcast?
Well, I have found that history is one of the greatest things that you can learn from. And unfortunately, I also think that reading history books is very boring. So one of the things that I would encourage someone to do is to find something that they think is interesting, like historical fiction types of books. And I really find these really fascinating, where you read about something that happened in the past through the eyes of another. So, for example, there's a great book called A Long Way Gone, Tales of a Boy Soldier. And the guy who wrote it's name's Ishmael Bale, and he is actually on the United Nations Council for Children, but he was also someone who was stolen by the army in Sierra Leone and raised as a boy soldier. And so when you read a book like that, you learn so much about what people have gone through and what their struggles are. And so as a woman who wants to promote women's rights, but also the rights of all people, I think it's really important that somehow we don't just that we tap into an understanding of what people have had to go through in their own struggles, whether it be someone like that who's a boy soldier in Africa, or it's someone like Margaret Thatcher who came up to be the Prime Minister of Great Britain. All of these things are really important, and I would encourage women of all types and colors to read about the experiences of other women and of other marginalized peoples.
I love that. I think that's a fantastic suggestion. And I think we can only become more well-rounded, more compassionate, and more understanding as we hear others' stories. And so I think that's a very wise suggestion. So, Ashlie, I mean, we've talked about it all. We've talked about government. We've talked about lifting other women up. We've talked about some of the complex issues of today. And we're kind of coming to a close. But I just want to say thank you so much for your time. Thank you so much for being with us, being willing to sit down with us, for what you do in government and the influences that has. And, of course, for your beautiful daughter, Emma.
Especially that one.
Especially
Thank
that
y'all.
one.
And I tell you, the three of y'all are a wonderful inspiration to women across the country. And I'm really proud of y'all and very proud of my daughter.
You're going to make me cry.
You're too kind.
Thank you. Well, with all that, we're just going to say thank you so much, women beings, for being here with us today, for joining in the conversation. Speaking of the conversation, don't always forget that you can follow us on Instagram, on TikTok. We are on YouTube. You can listen to us just about anywhere you can get a podcast. So make sure you're following us, because we often are engaging on our social channels and always are willing to have a conversation there. So make sure you are engaged. And
Absolutely.
Yeah.
with all that.
Well, and if you guys wouldn't mind, we also would love to currently beg you for a rating and a review.
Yes.
Of the podcast. You can review it on Apple Podcasts or on whatever podcasting platform that you use. There's probably a way for you to rate the podcast, but that's going to get other people to listen to it. The more that you guys talk about how you like the podcast, the more that other people will find it, and the message that you enjoy will be shared to others. And that's really what we want to do. We want to impact people, and so we would really appreciate that if you would leave us a little something in the reviews.
Leave us a little something.
A little something.
A little Christmas gift.
Well, it'll be a late Christmas gift.
A late Christmas gift.
Absolutely. Well, and I think, with all that, make sure you're following us. Give us a review, your woman being checklist for the week. There it is. And with all that, we're going to say thank you for joining, and we will catch you next time.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.